So I hate my job and I'm tired of adulting, so I've been spending my free time learning about colours. And it's surprisingly interesting. As it turns out, there are two different methods for making colour. Additive colour theory, which uses the primary colours red, green and blue, derived from the human eye's photoreceptors. You add them together and you get the secondary colours cyan, magenta and yellow. And you add those to the primary colours and you get a bunch of tertiary colours, which I'm not going to bother reading out. And this is the one I vaguely remember from primary school, but then there's this whole other system that I had no idea about called subtractive colour theory, which works by subtracting light, hence the name. So it goes from white to black, and it's most often used in printers, including the printer I have, which is why my colour cartridge thing says cyan, magenta and yellow, because these are the primary colours for this system. You mix them together and you get the secondary colours red, blue and green, and then you mix those together and you get a fuck ton of tertiary colours. But either system you use, you end up with a whole heap of colours and it's a bit of a clusterfuck. So everyone just kind of organises it in a wheel, like this one. The colour wheel is a really cool tool for design. Not only does it sort your colours, but it gives you guidelines on how well they go together. For example, you could use any three colours next to each other and you've got yourself a little colour scheme because these colours all work really well together. Colours directly opposite each other are complementary, something I first heard about in Egoraptor's Sequelitis on Castlevania, which if you haven't seen, go check out, it's pretty dope. But basically, you put one over the other and it'll make it stand out, almost in a 3D way. At least that's how it looks to my eyes, at least. Or you can go all triadic and use three colours evenly spaced around the colour wheel. Now, these are only guidelines, you can do whatever you want with colour, but I really like these three basic schemes just because they provide a great foundation for characters or levels that you can then dick around with later if you want to do something weird. For example, if you've got a lava level, you're obviously going to use a lot of red. You can then stick in some yellow and some blue to kind of break it up and avoid the ultra glowy one-note nightmare that was Lost Izalith in Dark Souls. But you can also add some orange and magenta to the lava, because they are next to each other on the wheel, so they'll go really well together. And the orange will contrast the blue as well, so you can have that bleed over into those areas. It's just a really cool way of assigning colour. You can also split the wheel down the middle to help with themes. Your warm colours, your reds, oranges and yellows are on one side. Now, warm colours are usually associated with energy, brightness and heat. The other side is your cool colours, your blues, greens, purples. Cool colours are often associated with calm, peace and serenity and, well, cold. So you can set a real mood with just the colour scheme. I kind of get why people on house decorator shows are so obsessed with it now. Colour tells a story, and there's no better example than colour telling a story than in Nier Automata. The sequence that plays upon first entrance to the city ruins, it's a short scene composed of establishing shots of the environment that ends with a pan down from the skyline to return the camera to the usual gameplay position. Sounds pretty lame, but just watch it for a second.
Target location acquired. Marking on map. Proposal. Proceed to target location.
It's pretty haunting, right? Well, I mean, I think so anyway. And it tells us so much about the world and the characters before we as a player get to interact with it. The colour scheme is simple, and being predominantly from the cool side, it gives a calm and non-threatening tone to the whole thing, purposely undercutting what the game has told you to subvert your expectations. Like, you play as soldiers. Like, you've just seen them brutalized and die, fighting in an ever-ending war against machines that really don't give a shit, and then sent deep into enemy territory, and what greets you? It's not at all a war zone. It's not even anything like the rusted out industrial tutorial area that you've already been through. Here, greens and greys are dominant. And for contrast, the area makes use of the two colours either side of green on the colour wheel, blue in the sky and a subtle yellow filter over the light. The green and blue make us feel at ease, being from the cool side, and the yellow gives the impression of warmth. See, visual mediums like games often really struggle with depicting other senses. Concepts like temperature don't really exist in the world, and games will usually just resort to telling you you are cold by some way of meter or bar or something. Or, like Nier Automata, not mention it overtly, but use colour to set up a vibe, invoking the same emotional response you'd get from the physical feeling without triggering the feeling itself, which is just my fancy way of saying it hits you in the feels. It's a clever little workaround for a limitation of the medium. Against this backdrop, the deep black of the main characters stands out pretty majorly. An advantage from a gameplay perspective, as your characters never get lost on screen when shit starts exploding, but also visually shows you that this is not their world. The game paints, in a very literal sense, the characters and you, the player by proxy, as synthetic, since none of the colours in the design of the main characters are dominant features of the world. The game then takes it a step further, making the machines a similar rundown grey to the architecture that we see, something we already associate with the world thanks to the opening. Because of this, we see the machines as natural, but also sets them up as antagonists to our character, the whole kind of black versus white thing. They do the same thing with A2. She has elements of black in her design, but it's much less, and what is there is a much more dulled out hue, showing that everything isn't as black and white for her as it is for 9S and 2B, who are literally black and white. In terms of colour, A2 lies somewhere between natural and synthetic. It's then no surprise to learn that this is exactly where she sits in the story. Not a machine, but not you are either. Instead of telling you outright the allegiances of the characters, the game takes full advantage of its medium and shows you by having the characters literally wear it. It's wonderful, wonderful visual storytelling. And in general, this game puts so much detail into every inch of its character design that I really want to talk more about it, but I'm going to say that for a different video. As you can tell, I'm a huge fan of this game, but for all the love I have for it, I find it really difficult to talk about, especially to people who haven't played the game. So much of what makes this game special is built up little by little over time, in ways that don't really translate to words very well. Like, for example, I asked a friend of mine who's into this game as much as me, like, what is this game about? And she replied with, it's, you know. And I was like, yeah, I know. And I'm not being sarcastic, like I totally got what she was saying. There's an atmosphere created by the colour and so much more that makes it feel like a world worth fighting for. A2 says it best.
I never quite realized how beautiful this world is.
There's that old fact that 90% of communication is non-verbal, and if that really is the case, then games have the potential to say quite a lot. But while Nier does have an amazing aesthetic, it's not particularly stylized. What about something a bit more bombastic? Persona 5 just oozes style. It's a really fun game that delves into some equally heavy themes, but my god does it have fun showing you them. Like it or love it, the art style is a lot, and I want to focus in particular on how we're introduced to it. So the opening animation starts with this awesome looking skyline, and weirdly enough, it's the most colourful thing in the scene. Like, you don't see this many colours spread out all over the place like this again, and it's only here now as a primer, just as a kind of heads up, just in case you didn't know about the heavily stylized nature of the game, or, I don't know, got a game without a box or something. Because the craziness of the colour palette that contributes to the style so much isn't created by shoving every colour under the sun into every frame, because that would just be an absolute mess. Instead, it's done by constantly switching between related colours that are carefully organised on the screen with clever framing and featuring that all-important tool that we all tend to forget we have, restraint. Seriously, it would have been so easy to just shove a bunch of bright colours on this and call it a day, but no, the amount of thought and work that went into this little sequence is astounding. Big thumbs up to whoever did this, you smashed it. So after the skyline shot, we get this here, and we begin with orange and its complement, blue. It's a simple start, which is a great way to start, because it leaves a lot of room to build, and also doesn't overwhelm anyone with the rainbow explosion. Our eye is drawn to the blue light because of the helicopter that kind of flies past, but also because the blue light moves, and we naturally tend to track movement. As it moves, it reveals the statue, which uses a triadic colour scheme of blue, yellow, and red. This is what I mean when I said clever framing. See, the blue light splits the frame down the middle, with the blue being the anchor colour holding everything together. On one side, you get the complementary pairing of blue and orange, and on the other, it's part of a triad. By separating them like this, you can get away with having way more colour on screen than normal without it looking like an absolute shit show. But it also lets you seamlessly transition out some colours later, because if you don't, your scene is just going to devolve into an 80s drug trip. So we ditch the orange, leaving only the triad. As we zoom in, the yellow becomes more and more dominant until we move a step from yellow to green that is paired with its complement, red, the same red that we saw before. They are very particularly arranged in the frame so that the movement of colour mimics the camera movement. Red is further away from yellow, our target, on the wheel, so it's placed on the outside of the frame, while yellow is placed in the centre. Green is next to yellow and complementary of red, so it goes between the two. This means that as we zoom in, the colours furthest away from yellow disappear out of shot first. So the colours, like the camera, move closer to our target, aka the yellow window. It's so good. The attention and care that was put into the colour of this game is one of the reasons it works so well. But this is all pretty subjective. What about something a bit more gameplay based? Mirror's Edge is an interesting game to talk about in general, but the colours in it are particularly interesting. Full disclosure, I haven't played all of this game because I tried to play it on my brother's computer that shortly after deciding not to run the game completely died. So yeah, I'd like to play more because I didn't really give it a real shot, but I'm pretty broke right now, so well, that'll have to wait. So the game uses colour as a guide, a breadcrumb trail to keep you from getting lost. A good idea, since the game has a lot of white rooftops with no real landmarks to orient yourself, especially if you're new to the world. It's a great and different use of colour that I've only seen in one other game, which we'll get to. But while I love it as a concept, I first want to talk about the drawbacks, because there are a few, well, one in particular. In a playthrough of the game by this guy, I saw this. It's about 5 minutes in, and it's exactly what happened to me. You can see he's confused. Where do I go? In the early game, this approach instills a dependence on it that has to later be undone. I remember being utterly lost at one point in the game where you have to escape from the RPA building and just ended up running in circles for hours because I hadn't learned to think like a runner. I wasn't paying attention to the skills and mechanics taught to me or how I could use the level design to create my own path to victory. Nah, I was just scanning for red. This hamstrings the player a little bit. The game teaches you a pattern that you then need to later unlearn, and while Mirror's Edge does do this, after a while, you kind of forget about the red and do exactly what I couldn't. Just find your own way. But the early game dependence, in my opinion, is an unnecessary hurdle that can turn players away. I mean, it certainly did me at least. That's not to say I think this is a bad idea. On the contrary, it's great. It's a great way of leading players around a world, but needs a hot minute to work out some of the kinks. That said, it's light years ahead of games like Halo and its waypoint systems. The closest Halo comes to being good at leading players around a map is in Reach. During the night mission that begins by giving you a sniper rifle, and you have to kind of creep through. That's not bad, but only because the level is pretty much a straight line. The issue with waypoint systems like that used in Halo is that they focus your attention on the minimap instead of the level. Where do I go? Check the minimap. Where are my enemies? Check the minimap. I've played through all of the Halos except 5 multiple times, and I genuinely only remember a handful of maps, and to be honest, most of them are just the firefight ones from Reach. I played like 4 hours of Mirror's Edge like one time 7 years ago, and I remember all of it because I had to pay attention to the level. Like, if I wanted to know who was wrecking me, I had to actually look around. I had to navigate and re-navigate on the fly each time I'd inevitably fucked up and gone the wrong way. Is it any wonder then that the other game I saw take this approach is Doom Eternal? See, when you think about it, this system is a perfect fit for shooters because players are already accustomed to looking for color. Like, we recognize the red in our crosshairs before we even know what it is we're aiming at. So, the mad lads at id Software took this concept to the extreme and just color-coded everything. Green is your anchor color. Why green? Because Doomguy's green. It's a simple association, but it works great as to why the armor pickups and the extra lives are green, because they are directly applied to Doomguy himself. Nier Automata showed us that blue and yellow work great with green, and Doom does the same. Health is blue, and bullet ammo is yellow. But the game's not done. As you continue your onslaught, building up more and more of an arsenal, the colors too build, taking one more step around each side of the wheel, adding in orange for shell ammo and purple for plasma weapons. The devs realized that if a game this fast-paced was going to work, players needed to know what stuff does instantly, and it needed to be communicated in a way that everyone could understand, regardless of what language they spoke. So they used color. It's great. And since the groundwork was already there, they used the same breadcrumb trail Mirror's Edge does, having green lights literally show you the way forward, but get around the problems that Mirror's Edge had, in the early game at least, with deceptively simple level design. Remember that map from Reach I was talking about earlier, with the sniper rifles that was kind of good? Doom uses a lot of that same basic blueprint in its levels, but to a much greater effect because the whole game is kind of planned around that style of level design. By confining us to straight-line gauntlet-type maps with little to no deviating paths, players were granted more freedom to move around within those smaller spaces. This makes arena fights a real joy. The green lights are dotted all over the ledges that you can climb. The yellow of the swinging bars stands out too, showing you instantly where you can and can't go. And the limited size of the space lets you get comfortable quickly. All this adds up to a feeling of safety, which is weird considering Doom's premise. You are never afraid to move in Doom, and since you can't really get lost, like there's only one way forward, and if everything is already dead, you're going the wrong way. So explore all you want, and when you're done, follow the green. It's simple, elegant, and really fucking cool. Color is really cool, and I had fun talking about it. Have a good one. Cheers. Hey, so just one more thing before I leave you alone, that I forgot to mention. This is a really basic version of color theory. It gets way more complicated, way more in depth. If you want to learn some more, I'll leave some links in the box you can check out. There is a part 2 of this kind of thing that I'm planning. It's on sound in video games, but I don't think that's going to be out for a while because I started this in January and it's basically December now, so yeah, it's gonna take me a hot minute, but I don't know, look forward to that, I guess. Right, yeah, I'll leave you alone now. Cheers.